Okay, good evening, everyone. Good evening. Good evening, Sunny Bunani. Dumelang. Goeienaand. I'd like to welcome you all to the 2025 Helen Joseph Memorial Lecture. I am Camilla Naidu. I'm the Dean of the Faculty of Humanities, and I'd like to acknowledge all our dignitaries in attendance, including our Vice-Chancellor, Prof. Letlokwa Mpedi, our ex-DVC, Prof. Anjana Parak, thank you for being here. Government officials, ELG members, vice deans, heads, directors, all colleagues and guests who have made time to be present, we appreciate you being here. This is our long-standing event, so I thank you for your consistent support. Special thanks to Prof. Leila Patel, Prof. Lauren Graham, and Jade Peterser for the excellent organizing and for making this event a reality. Thank you very much. We are very pleased that the Center for Social Development in Africa is hosting the Helen Joseph Memorial Lecture in 2025, and we are honored this year to have Dr. Silke Staab, a research specialist at the United Nations Women, as the keynote speaker. Welcome, Dr. Staab. It's a pleasure to have you here at a time when all eyes are on the United Nations, debating its role and place in global politics and its transformative possibilities. So let's give our speaker a round of applause. The Helen Joseph Memorial Lecture is a special one in the history of the University of Johannesburg. It is now in its 20th year as we celebrate UJ at 20. The late Jessie Duarte was the first keynote speaker, and Professor Leila Patel has been the passionate driving force of the annual lectures. We congratulate Prof. Patel for a recent NRF award. She attained the 2025 NRF Public Engagement with Research Award in recognition of her outstanding contributions to public engagement with science. So I think we deserve another round of applause here. So the award illustrates the country's recognition of her impactful work at the national, community, and institutional levels. Prof. Patel and her team have championed the annual events, with some of them hosted by the Department of History and the Center for Race, Gender, and Class. So for those who are not familiar with the Helen Joseph legacy, it may be important to say a few words about who Helen Joseph was. As we may know, the late Helen Joseph was born in Britain, but in time became one of South Africa's most beloved freedom fighters. She played a significant role in South Africa's anti-apartheid struggle, and along with Lillian Ngoyi, formed the Federation of South African Women, known as FEDSAW. On August 9th, 1956, Helen Joseph was one of the key leaders in a historic march of 20,000 women to the Union buildings in Pretoria. They were protesting against the infamous pass laws. So when we commemorate the event 60 to 70 years later as National Women's Day, it is important to remember the women who paved the way for our emancipation. Helen Joseph embodied all the progressive values that freedom-loving people today still cherish. Nelson Mandela described Helen Joseph as a woman of courage who helped to shape our destiny and thus will always be an unforgettable part of our history. In celebrating Helen Joseph's life and what she stood for, we've brought in numerous speakers over the past 20 years addressing diverse topics ranging from social security reform, gender and care, engaging men in development, rethinking civil society and democracy, judicial independence, the ANC Women's League and gender equality, fees must fall, and increasingly on the more contemporary struggles of women in South Africa. With the History Department and Prof. Natasha Erlang as the host, we had memorable lectures offered by Prof. Kathy Albertine and Dr. Tlaleng Mofokeng. With Prof. Victoria Collis Buthelezi, we've had excellent and moving presentations by Shirazad Tillet, and in 2023, with our own Chancellor, Dr. Phumzile Mlambo Ngcuka, who addressed us on an intergenerational struggle for gender equality. The Helen Joseph Lectures are now well established and have grown into authentic public spaces for critical reflection on how far we have come and also on what lies ahead. We are honored that each Helen Joseph Memorial Lecture has been opened by our Vice Chancellor, from Iron Rensburg to Tilitsi Murwala to Litlokwa Mpedi. On this note, I would like to introduce our Vice Chancellor, Prof. Mpedi, who will offer an official welcome. So let me say a few words about Prof. Mpedi. He's very well known, so not too much. Prof. Mpedi is a product of the University of Johannesburg. He completed his various degrees here. He also received a DAAD Award for Study in Germany. He has been a Max Planck Fellow, Deputy Director of the Center for International and Comparative Labor and Social Security Law, Professor of Law, Vice Dean, DVC, and now Chancellor and Principal. Professor Mpedi has published widely on social security and labor law in South Africa, Southern Africa, and Anglophone Africa, and is an NRF B-rated scholar. I should also add that Prof. Mpedi, I accompanied Prof. Mpedi to Georgia when he received his first honorary doctorate in 2023, and I'm looking forward to another invitation to join him when he gets his second honorary doctorate in a short while, this time from Liberia. Congratulations, VC, and I think you deserve a round of applause. So thank you very much for being here, and I now hand over to Prof. Litlokwa Mpedi. Thank you, Prof. Just wing it. You found it?
No, it's all
You all right?
Yeah, I'm all right. You know, something happened. My speech disappeared when I was there. So I say to Prof. Leila Patel that, oh, no, I hope she'll, I said to her, I hope Kamala will go on so that I can relocate my speech. Now we came up with a little plan that will ask people to come in so long that it looks like the plan has changed because I said, have you found it? So I'm on my own. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Let me start by acknowledging Professor Anjina Parek. I won't say former, Camilla, because I'm looking at, this is my last job at the great University of Johannesburg. So when I'm gone, I don't want people to call me former Vice Chancellor. I want people to say Vice Chancellor Emeritus. So, it sounds nice, doesn't it? So I would say Deputy Vice Chancellor Academic Emeritus, Prof. Parek. Prof. Parek gave me a job here. So I have to acknowledge Prof. Parek. It's so good to see you, Prof. Shall we allow people to settle? And let me also acknowledge our speaker this evening, Dr. Silke Staab. I was not sure if it's the German one. Is it German? Okay, yeah, because Dr. Silke Staab, our speaker this evening, thank you so much for your support, ma'am. I also wish to take this opportunity to acknowledge our Executive Dean, Professor Camilla Naidu. It's always great to be in your presence, Prof. Leila Patel. Many people may not know, I'm a social security law scholar, and but I spent most of my time with non-lawyers and writing with non-lawyers, and Prof. Patel is one of those people that I had the honor of collaborating with and learning a lot from. And it's always great, to be in your company, Prof. And thanks for your leadership and support. Many of you will know Prof. Patel, works in the area of social development, but he has done a lot of great work in the area of social security. And congratulations once again, on your numerous awards. The latest really a fitting one and we are grateful for that because you continue to, elevate the great University of Johannesburg. Earlier on, I said to Prof. Patel that, I sent you a sharp on LinkedIn. I hope you saw it. And he said, I don't check those. Then I said, no, that I also sent you I put a message in the Vice Chancellor's, weekly newsletter, and that she said, I read. And, you should have seen the smile on my face, because sometimes you wonder if people get a chance to read this Vice Chancellor's newsletters. Ladies and gentlemen, let me also acknowledge Professor Graham. Prof, you asked me not to acknowledge you, but I cannot risk not acknowledging the chairperson of the Academic Freedom Committee of Senate. I won't make that mistake, so let me acknowledge you. And it's always a pleasure working with you, Prof. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, you are all welcome here at the great University of Johannesburg. In my language, we have a saying, and I will translate it, I'll paraphrase it. It says, a home that doesn't receive guests is a bad home. It may sound weird, families that never receive guests, I looked at where I come from the village where I come from. Families that do not receive guests, I looked at with suspicion. These are weird people. And we are not weird here at the great University of Johannesburg, because look how full this place is. You are our guests, and we appreciate you. My task this evening is a simple one, is to welcome each and every one of you. But I know there will be vote of thanks, but let me also thank you for setting time aside to come and spend this evening with us. We also appreciate having guests, because there are certain things you cannot do without guests. That special bottle of wine, Prof. Barek, if there are no guests, there's no justification for one, drinking it. And today, I hope, Prof. Kamila, there will be something for our guests, and then we can join in. Ladies and gentlemen, this is an extremely important lecture, and it's of course, Women's Month. We just had, Women's Day, and it's not just about Women's Day and Women's Month. I always emphasize the fact that we should make every day a women's day. But there will always be these special days where we celebrate stalwarts like the lady that this lecture is named after, Helen Joseph. So, ladies and gentlemen, yes, let's enjoy, let's learn from the experts, let's engage this afternoon, this evening, but let's go out there and make each day a women's day. And I'll tell you why. We know the challenges that we are facing, that we continue to face, not only in South Africa, but on the continent and throughout the world, issues of women underrepresentation. If you look at the statistics, who are the poorest? It's women, children, and it's women that always look after children. We need to do more to support women. And I don't say it because I'm standing in front of you, because here, Kamala, I hope you will agree, we walk the talk. We take matters like this seriously. But what we're doing can never be enough. We can never do this alone. We need your support. We need to spread the word. Gender-based violence, I'm sure each of us has a story to tell about some of these challenges that we are facing out there. We have to go out there and make that difference. And I'm speaking also this evening. I abandoned my speech completely. I found it, but I felt I should just speak from the bottom of my heart. I also want to speak to men. And I'm glad there are so many men attending this event. We have a role to play. I always say, in as much as we are a problem as men, but we can also be part of the solution to address these challenges. Let's lead by example. Let's encourage young men to be better men. Also old men, because there are also older men who act like children, who also need to be reined in. Here at the university, I lead a men's forum. And the support that we get, from students, from men, is really remarkable. And I'm saying all the time, let's take this information out there. and lead with example. There is this thing that children look up to the older ones. They look up to their dads to see, what they are doing, and they emulate that. If a child sees daddy beating up mom every day, that child will grow up to be an abuser. This is where I'm coming from when I mention this. But if a young man sees, happiness all the time, one will do that. This is what we are told. And I can attest to that. Personally, I grew up seeing my dad buying us clothes from Sales House. Older ones will remember Sales House. It was a clothing store. It's no longer there. And he knew the sizes of everyone, including my mom. And he would buy her two-piece suits and so on, and we'll start with her. And guess what? This is what I do for my wife, because I saw my dad doing that. I don't get it right, I'll confess, and I'm not saying I'm perfect. I learned the hard way. I didn't know there's a European size. And you come home, you're smiling, look what I got you. And then it doesn't fit. That is always appreciated, is the thought that counts. I always get it right on the African continent, because then I show them the picture and then they get it right. And now with WhatsApp, you can do a WhatsApp call. China is where I struggle. India, I succeeded because the sari was one size fit all. But the problem is, it was so funny because the shopkeeper put it on me to show me how to wear it. And a colleague of mine from NMU was taking pictures. I said, you don't dare share those pictures. And when I arrived home, I tried to put it on. I said, it's easy. And then the thing couldn't sit well, and we abandoned the idea. Only later, somebody said, you can take it somewhere, they will prepare it, and then she can wear it. But now I don't have the guts to ask her, because I failed at the beginning. It might be something that we are laughing at, but it doesn't take a lot for us to move from these barbaric acts and make a difference and make sure that people out there do what they need to do. It's 2025, ladies and gentlemen. We cannot be dealing with the same old problems that, we've been dealing with, that Mayor Helen Joseph was dealing with. Of course, they had other challenges, but some of the challenges we're dealing with today, they were still there: poverty and exclusion, marginalization. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm looking forward to this lecture. Thank you very much. And when we say this, it should not just be a slogan. It should be given a modern twist, and it should be taken seriously so that we can continue to build our countries. I'll tell you one thing. I've got this belief that the day we are led, especially in a country of ours, I know now I'm being controversial, by a lady, is the day when things will start to be sorted out. And we will not just have those leaders. We need to build those leaders. Students that we have here, we should shape them to become those leaders that we want, to go out there and deal with some of these challenges. Namibia has elected the first female president, and she's leading, isn't it? Would you agree with me that she's really leading, and we need more of those? Ladies and gentlemen, let me shut up. Thank you very much for this, and thanks for your support, and welcome to the great University of Johannesburg. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vice Chancellor, for those important messages and heartfelt reminders to us. I'm now going to call upon Prof. Leila Patel to introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Vice Chancellor. And thank you for your very warm welcome this evening. I just wanted to thank everybody for being here. It's been hard getting people here to attend in-person events after COVID, and I think this is probably just one of those special times that we've been able to fill this room, so I really appreciate that. So it is a real pleasure and an honor for me to introduce Dr. Silke Staab to you to deliver the 20th Annual Helen Joseph Memorial Lecture. Dr. Staab is a senior research specialist at UN Women in New York and co-author of several of the organization's flagship reports, most recently, Harnessing Social Protection for Gender Equality, Resilience and Transformation, published late last year. The World Survey of the Role of Women in Development, which is what this report is conducted every 5 years and assesses the progress, gaps, and challenges in achieving gender equality and women's empowerment in the context of sustainable development. The report is drawn up in consultation with community organizations, UN Women's extensive civil society network, experts, and government. And it's really a testament to what can be achieved by multilateral organizations because universities and governments just don't have the resources to produce the quality of reports that is produced by the UN. So Silke is the lead author, along with her colleagues Lo Williams, Constantia Tabush, and Laura Taku. The report provides new data and guidance on taking forward a more gender-responsive and transformative social protection system, a subject of great relevance to us in South Africa, given our large social protection system and the fact that the majority are, in some of our programs, women only. Other recent flagship publications that she has been involved with include Feminist Climate Justice, a framework for action published in 2023, and Beyond COVID-19, a feminist plan for sustainability and social justice published in 2022. Before joining UN Women, Silke worked as a researcher for different UN agencies and non-governmental organizations, including the United Nations Research Institute for Social Development, UNRISD, and the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean. So while at UNRISD, she worked closely with the distinguished UN policy scholar and advocate, also a former Helen Joseph alumna, if I may say so, and Shara Razavi. This early work on the political economy political and social economy of care, published in 2007, laid the foundation for the emerging global consensus on the need for integrating care in social and economic development and in promoting greater gender justice. Today, ideas about gender and care have flourished around the world and are now incorporated in several UN resolutions of the General Assembly and the Human Rights Council. Countries such as Mexico, through the Global Alliance of Care and UN Women, are at the forefront of promoting a care agenda in social policy worldwide. And I hope the lecture will help us to think about the care agenda in the South African context. The political declaration of the forthcoming Second World Summit for Social Development to be held in Doha, Dakar, on between the 4th and the 6th of November, now acknowledges the importance of making public and private investments in care. We will learn more about this shortly. Silke holds a PhD in politics from the University of Manchester and has published widely on gender equality, social protection and care policies, including publishing in journals like Development and Change, Global Social Policy, Social Politics, and Third World Quarterly. Her 2017 book entitled Gender and Politics and the Politics of Gradual Change, published by Palgrave, analyzes the progress and limitations of social protection reforms and innovations in Chile from a gender perspective. I asked Silke this afternoon what drives her and motivates her to do this work. And this is what she said, and I quote, "My parents were activists in Germany and in the anti-apartheid solidarity movement. I was exposed to values of social justice, equity, and fairness early on, which shaped me and my work. I also had a very involved father, she said. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming Dr. Silke Staab.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Vice Chancellor Professor Mpedi, Professor Camilla Naidu, Dean of the Faculty of Humanities, Professor Lauren Graham, Director of the Center for Social Development in Africa, faculty, students, distinguished guests. I am deeply honored and beyond thrilled to be here tonight to spend this evening with you, commemorating Helen Joseph, a woman who left a lasting imprint on South Africa's democracy, as we've heard previously. The values that motivated Helen, courage, solidarity, commitment to collective action, remain central to addressing the most pressing problems of our time. Indeed, I would say they are more vital than ever. In the face of resurgent authoritarianism, widening inequality, escalating armed conflict, and growing assaults on women's rights globally, they offer a powerful counterpoint to the exclusionary and dehumanizing narrative that we so often hear that glorifies self-interest and the pursuit of privilege through power and domination. There are values that continue to animate women's rights activists across the globe, from the Women Life Freedom movement in Iran demanding democratic reform and civic liberties, to the indigenous women in Bolivia and Colombia defending ancestral territory from mining and deforestation, from the domestic workers in India and across the globe rallying to obtain basic recognitions as workers with rights to fair wages and social protection, to the women in Gaza and Sudan who are working tirelessly to support their communities and their families through the horrors of war and occupation and demand lasting peace and justice. In this year of global summits, from the Financing for Development Conference to the World Summit on Social Development to the G20 to the COP30, these ongoing struggles remind us that progress towards social justice rarely begins in meeting rooms and marble halls. It is through the activism, advocacy, and alliance building of people like Helen Joseph and the countless other women in the Federation of South African Women, FEDSAW, that pressure for change is built, that the demands of the most marginalized are amplified, and that a shared vision for justice is forged. The lecture I'm delivering today focuses on the role of social protection in promoting gender equality and social justice. To do so, I will draw heavily on the research and analysis we conducted for UN Women's recently launched flagship report that was already mentioned, entitled Harnessing Social Protection for Gender Equality, Resilience, and Transformation. We worked on this report for 2 years, and it has benefited from consultations with almost 100 experts from civil society, the UN system, and academia, including Professor Leila Patel, to whom I owe the honor of this invitation. The title of our report and the reference to resilience in particular reflects the fact that when we started to work on this project in 2022, it seemed impossible to speak about the role of social protection in promoting gender equality without acknowledging the broader context of repeated shocks and cascading crises. 3 years later, this reality is undeniable. From the COVID-19 pandemic to food, fuel, and financial crises, from escalating climate disasters to an unprecedented number of violent conflicts, repeated shocks have continued to wreak havoc with people's lives and livelihoods. The impacts, of course, of these events are not equally felt by everyone. To paraphrase from UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres' 2020 Nelson Mandela lecture, while some navigate these turbulent waters in super yachts, others are left clinging to drifting debris. Inequality dramatically increases vulnerability to shocks, and in the process, it chips away at people's agency, dignity, and basic human rights. COVID-19 provided a major lesson in this regard. While high-income countries mobilized massive fiscal stimulus packages in response to the pandemic, low-income countries lacked the fiscal space to support health systems, social protection, or economic recovery. Within countries, structural disadvantages in labor markets compounded the impacts of the crisis, particularly on already marginalized groups. Like in South Africa and many countries, it was women, low-income and informal workers, migrants, and members of historically oppressed racial groups who were among the first to lose their jobs and incomes, and often among the last to recover them, if they did at all. Inequality also has deep political ramifications, undermining solidarity, trust in public institutions, and faith in the possibilities of democratic representation. From what I understand, these are trends that are not unfamiliar to a South African audience. Across countries and regions, we see how right-wing populist movements capitalize on them, weaponizing legitimate grievances to propagate various brands of progressive nationalism, often alongside anti-immigrant and anti-gender rhetoric. Where such forces have gained access to state power, whether through the ballot box or through force, we have seen hard-won gender equality gains reversed, often as part of larger, thinly veiled authoritarian projects. This wilding of domestic politics, as Nancy Fraser calls it, reverberates on the global stage as well. Multilateralism is faltering under pressure. We've seen some governments withdraw from international commitments on climate change and gender-based violence. The system has remained largely paralyzed in the face of escalating humanitarian crises, and major donors have slashed aid budgets, while military spending is set to rise yet further, with devastating consequences for women and girls, particularly in the global south. Clearly, social protection alone cannot solve these systemic crises, but it remains a foundational pillar of broader strategies needed to transform societies towards gender equality and social justice. Social protection is also part of a thick understanding of democracy, where economic and social rights give material substance to the promise of political equality. In South Africa, Helen Joseph contributed to such an understanding at the Congress of the People in 1955 through what she herself in her memoir calls her social workers' speech, focusing on, and I cite, the right to homes and houses, the ending of hunger, the provision of medical care, the care for the aged, the sick, the young, and the family. Today, this thick understanding of democracy is reflected in the constitution of your country, one of the most progressive when it comes to social and economic rights. Throughout this lecture, I will refer to social protection as a set of policies and programs designed to reduce and prevent poverty, vulnerability, and social exclusion throughout the life course. This includes things like child benefits, access to affordable health care, old age pensions, unemployment protection, maternity leave. I will also refer to social protection systems as nationally specific constellations that comprise these schemes and programs, both in their contributory and non-contributory form, as well as the processes required for their operations, such as legal frameworks, governance, delivery, and financing mechanisms. In an increasingly unstable world, robust gender-responsive social protection systems can play a key role in protecting women and girls against poverty during crises. They can strengthen their ability to cope with critical life course events, such as having a child, entering old age, losing a job, and they can nurture capabilities, livelihoods, and hope for the future. In doing these things well, social protection could also help rebuild trust in public institutions and social solidarity, and renew fraying social contracts between people and the state. But these outcomes are not automatic. And so in the remainder of this lecture, I would like to explore what it would take to realize this transformative potential of social protection. This is not a new question, and African scholars have contributed to its exploration from different angles, including the late Tandika Makanda-Wiri, my former director at the United Nations Research Institute for Social Development, who in the early 2000s really coined and conceptualized the term transformative social policy in a development context. My focus today is specifically on how social protection can be harnessed to promote gender equality. I will make three key arguments. First, I will argue that it is important to establish the basics. Social protection is not a privilege, it is a human right. Currently, however, almost half of the world's population remains excluded. So closing gaps in social protection coverage between high and low income countries, between formal and informal workers, between women and men is critical for turning the right to social protection into a lived reality. Second, social protection must go beyond its current narrow focus on income transfers. To address the structural drivers of women's poverty and vulnerability, we need integrated approaches that connect social protection to inclusive employment strategies and quality public services. Third, it is not only about what kind of benefits and services are included in social protection systems, but also about how they are delivered. Ensuring that policies and programs are implemented in ways that uphold the dignity and agency of women and girls in all their diversity is essential to unlocking their transformative power. Having made these three arguments, I will finish with some reflections on financing, which is often the elephant in the room, particularly in developing countries striving to build out their social protection systems, and I will highlight some bright spots of recent multilateral efforts to foster solidarity and collective action on this issue against the prevailing global environment. So let's start with the basics. For social protection to play a meaningful role in reducing and preventing poverty, it needs to reach enough people with benefits that address risks and vulnerabilities across the life course and that are high enough to meet basic needs. In social protection speak, this triad is referred to as coverage, adequacy, and comprehensiveness. In our report, we show that gender gaps and biases persist in all three areas, and I will give you some examples in what follows. In 2023, for the first time, more than half the global population, 50% of women and 54% of men, was covered by at least one social protection benefit. That's an increase of almost 10 percentage points since 2015. But even so, 2 billion women and girls and 1.8 billion men and boys remain without access to any form of social protection globally. What is more, gender gaps in social protection coverage have widened, particularly in lower middle income countries, suggesting that even in the context of this generally expanding coverage, the recent gains have benefited men more than women. Inequalities between countries also remain significant. While high-income countries have edged closer to universal coverage and middle-income countries have made important strides in closing gaps, coverage in low-income countries is below 10%, with little progress since 2015. In geographic terms, coverage is lowest in sub-Saharan Africa, while gender gaps are widest in Central and Southern Asia. These gaps are particularly concerning in light of the devastating climate change impacts that many low-income countries are already experiencing, even though they have least contributed to the crisis, being left with much weaker instruments to really buffer the effect of these increasing disasters. A closer look at sub-Saharan Africa reveals that despite important progress over the past 10 years, overall coverage remains low and even lower among women, with about 14% of women being covered with by at least one social protection benefit, compared to almost 17% of men. The coverage of specific schemes has also increased. Maternity benefits, for example, have increased from 3.5% to almost 6%, but this still leaves the vast majority of African women without income support during this crucial stage in their lives. Social assistance to vulnerable populations has gone up from 7 to 11%, but in most countries there is no sex disaggregated data, so we have little information about who within the household receives a cash benefit or can make decisions over how it is spent. Evidence also shows that even where women do gain access to social assistance schemes, low benefit levels and inconsistent payments often limit their impact on gender equality outcomes. In light of these gaps, extending social protection to those who are currently excluded is an important priority. This includes large swaths of women in informal employment, small-scale farmers, domestic workers, waste pickers, market women, and street vendors. In sub-Saharan Africa, nearly 90% of women and 84% of men are in informal employment. The exclusion of informal workers from social protection is often referred to as a missing middle in global policy debates, but clearly this is a missing majority of those who are often not considered poor enough to qualify for narrowly targeted social assistance programs, but lacking the capacity to make regular contributions to social insurance. The COVID-19 pandemic put a spotlight on the devastating consequences of this lack of protection, and in many countries it accelerated policy debates and discussions about how to extend social protection to informal workers. Lessons from reform efforts across countries suggest that solutions need to be tailored to the heterogeneous nature of informal employment, distinguishing, for example, between informal wage workers, such as domestic workers who have a clearly identifiable employer, and informal self-employed who don't have that clearly identifiable employer, as well as the reality that women often work in the most precarious informal jobs, so will be least likely to afford social insurance contributions without significant subsidization. Reforms also benefit from the direct involvement of affected groups. For instance, countries such as Ghana, Mexico, Tunisia, and South Africa have made notable progress in bringing domestic workers under the purview of their social security laws, driven in most cases by decades of sustained mobilization by domestic workers' organizations. And this is a really important step forward, but legal entitlements alone are not sufficient, as many of these countries are finding out. Effective implementation requires additional measures, including awareness raising among both workers and employers, incentives for registration, robust labor inspection mechanisms, and accessible claims and complaint processes. Strengthening non-contributory tax-financed schemes that offer protection across the life course presents another pathway to achieving at least a basic level of income security for all. Non-contributory schemes such as the social grant system in South Africa are particularly important for women who, because of pervasive inequalities in paid employment and unpaid care, continue to face significant disadvantages in social insurance schemes. In Latin America, for example, the expansion of non-contributory social pensions over the past 2 decades has played a really important role in narrowing gender gaps in pension coverage, even though gaps in benefit levels remain significant. Many African governments recognize the need to scale up investments in social protection. Kenya, for example, introduced a universal social pension for all older persons aged 70 and above in 2018. In 2022, the scheme reached almost 800,000 older persons, 60% of whom were women. Unlike many other transfers that are targeted at the household level, the social pension is an individual benefit, thereby really increasing the chances that older women have an income of their own. I also understand that South Africa is exploring ways to make the social relief of distress grant permanent, which would, for the first time, provide a form of unemployment protection to those outside of the formal sector. Ensuring that more women have access to social protection and that the benefits they receive are sufficient, regular, and predictable is really important to providing them with a stream of income that helps cover basic material needs. But poverty is about more than a lack of income. More than 2 decades after Amartya Sen's development as freedom transformed the way how we think about poverty and development, this may sound like stating the obvious. But much of the policy discourse around social protection continues to focus narrowly on the mechanics of income transfers. Social protection experts like to worry endlessly about who should receive cash transfers, when and how. Rarely do they pause to listen to women living in poverty about what else they may need to break the cycle of deprivation, reclaim their agency, and build hope for the future. This is what your colleague Tessa Hochfeld, a former professor at the Center for Social Development in Africa, did. In her bottom-up analysis of the Child Support Grant, she started with the lived experiences of women in poverty. And if you have not read her posthumously published book, Granting Justice, Cash Care and the Child Support Grant, I recommend it to you wholeheartedly. Because what she found resonates across countries. Women's experience of poverty is inseparable from the multiple and intersecting inequalities that they experience in their day-to-day lives. Labor markets and local economies that offer limited prospects for access to decent jobs, livelihood opportunities, a stable income. Early and intense unpaid care responsibilities for children and other family members. Limited access to and poor quality of basic services, including education, health, and housing for themselves and their dependents. And pervasive gender-based violence that often remains unrecognized and unaddressed by public institutions. So this brings me to my second point. If social protection is to achieve its transformative potential, it needs to respond to these non-material risks and vulnerabilities as well. Indeed, research shows that the effect of social protection on gender equality outcomes is stronger when income transfers form part of a more holistic support package. Comparative research on Brazil and South Africa, carried out by Professor Leila Patel, Wendy Hunter, and Natasha Borges, showed, for example, that cash transfers in both countries had a positive effect on women's agency, but those benefits were greater in Brazil, where the transfer is embedded in a stronger public health and social service network. Evidence from other contexts also suggests that additional support in the form of asset transfers or agricultural inputs for rural women, vocational and life skills training for young women, counseling and linked to support networks such as producer cooperatives or savings groups can enhance the impact of cash transfers. Across countries, low-income women report lack of affordable childcare as a barrier to pursuing training, employment, or livelihood alternatives. Economic stress and limited financial autonomy also often increase the risk of gender-based violence. Few cash transfer schemes respond to this reality in a meaningful way of gender-based violence. Few cash transfer schemes respond to this reality in a meaningful way, but there are exceptions, and some of them come from Latin America, which really has been also a trailblazer in bringing the care dimension into its social policies. So I wanted to share one example with you from the Dominican Republic's Superate program. In 2022, this program reached 1.3 million women with a cash transfer about $30 per month. 2 new components now provide additional support for caregivers and survivors of gender-based violence. The first is aimed at strengthening community-based care services for children, elderly, and persons with disabilities to free up women's time and give caregivers space to engage in other activities, including training and job search. The second component provides survivors of gender-based violence with additional support to rebuild their lives, including extra cash and access to referral services, training, and job mediation. These 2 components have been implemented in close cooperation with the Ministry of Women. And I mention this because it is, in most countries, in addition to grassroots women's rights organizations, it is the Ministries of Women and Gender Equality who have the longest standing and most robust experience in working on issues such as gender-based violence. And so these coordinated approaches that bring different sectoral ministries together in an integrated response are really important. Program-level innovations such as these can make a big difference in women's lives, but they cannot address broader structural constraints such as the lack of decent jobs or the dismal conditions of many public services after years of austerity and underinvestment. Addressing these issues requires efforts that extend beyond the scope of individual programs. Integrated approaches that combine social protection, employment, and macroeconomic policies are needed to promote decent job creation and raise the resources that are needed for improving access to quality public services, including care services. The co-benefits of integrated approaches are increasingly recognized. Countries in Latin America and beyond are spearheading integrated national care systems or integrated care policies and care strategies, as Kenya has also done, that combine social protection with training and support for paid and unpaid caregivers and investments in public services. Governments often shy away from such investments because the costs are high, but so are the returns. Globally, the ILO estimates that large-scale investments in child and elder care services could generate close to 300 million jobs by 2035. For South Africa, Debbie Budlander and Jerome de Henau estimated that making childcare services universally available for all children under the age of 5 could create 2 to 3 million new jobs and raise female employment rates by 10 percentage points. New tax and social security revenue from these jobs would also reduce the required annual investment by about a third. Such investments are part and parcel of the shift towards economies and societies that prioritize care and well-being. As feminist researchers from the Global South, such as Lynn Osome, Shirin Ray, and Jochi Tsikata have pointed out, however, notions of care and social reproduction need to be expansive. Particularly in agrarian contexts, policy responses cannot focus exclusively on care services, but need to consider access to land and commons as a foundation of everyday survival, care, and social reproduction. Particularly in the context of the climate crisis, which is rapidly eroding women's already fragile access to these resources, this calls for much deeper and longer-term transformations that support regenerative forms of production and adapt social protection systems to the reality of rural livelihoods. So far, I have focused primarily on the what of gender-responsive social protection. I have argued first for the need to establish the basics and expand social protection coverage and adequacy. I have secondly stressed that while income transfers are an important lifeline for women living in poverty, their transformative potential can only be realized when they are linked to broader efforts of services and sustainable livelihood options. The final point I want to make has to do with how these benefits and services are delivered. Compared to policy and program design, the gender dynamics of delivery and implementation have received less attention from researchers and are, I would say, almost completely absent from mainstream policy debates about social protection. In these debates, delivery is often approached as a series of technical steps that include activities such as outreach, enrollment, registration, disbursement of benefits. Digitalization and better data systems are foregrounded as solutions to complete these steps more efficiently and more effectively, particularly during crises. Data and technology are important tools, and deployed for the right reasons and with adequate safeguards, they can certainly contribute to make social protection more inclusive. But the disproportionate focus on technical tools obscures how central human relations are to sustaining effective delivery and to shaping women's experiences as social protection recipients and as social protection providers. As a trained social worker, I think Helen Joseph would have known and appreciated this. Globally, women make up 2/3 of the social sector workforce, occupying roles such as social workers, case managers, community health workers, school counselors, and welfare officers, they are often the most visible face of the state, particularly for marginalized communities. Well-trained and supported, these workers can identify hidden vulnerabilities, broach sensitive issues such as gender-based violence, and connect women to additional services such as legal aid, shelter, counseling, or healthcare. But too often, these workers, these frontline workers themselves, are subject to institutional neglect, facing poor employment security, lack of adequate social protection, unclear job descriptions, excessive caseloads, and inadequate training. Ethnographic research reveals how these difficult working conditions, combined with perverse institutional incentives and entrenched discriminatory social norms, can distort implementation and deepen the very exclusions that social protection schemes aim to address. In her account of the experiences of child support grant recipients, for example, Tessa Hochfeld documents how overstretched social workers repeatedly fail to respond to critical needs from mental health to child protection to sexual violence. In Egypt, Hania Sholkami found that social workers under-enrolled eligible women who lacked official documents because they feared criminal liability. In this case, the incentives were set to penalize them for errors of inclusion, but not for inaction or exclusion. And in Peru, Tara Cookson's ethnographic study of the Juntos cash transfer program revealed that frontline workers often imposed informal shadow conditions, as she calls it, on rural and indigenous women, giving the impression that their continued access to the cash benefit depended on fulfilling expectations like cultivating a community garden, cooking for the school lunch program, or giving birth at a designated health facility rather than at home. These unofficial conditions were sometimes the result of the personal whims of local managers. Other times, they were an attempt to leverage women's recipients' labor to fulfill their own onerous professional responsibilities. For many recipients, shadow conditions were unrealistic and burdensome. How could they grow a vegetable garden without access to irrigation? How could they give birth at a health clinic that was several hours walking distance from their homes? These examples show that the quality of case management systems and the relationships that frontline workers forge with recipients matter hugely for gender-responsive delivery. Where social protection and public service delivery is short-staffed or trust in state officials is low, women's and community-based organizations often play critical roles in bridging gaps, easing access, and enhancing bottom-up accountability. A good example of this comes from the Self-Employed Women's Association, SIWA, a trade union representing almost 3 million informal women workers in India. SIWA runs community-based resource centers known as Shakti Kendras, where workers and volunteers help women obtain health insurance cards, strengthen their capacity to use the health system independently, and broker links with the insurance scheme itself to share women's feedback. Over time, these Shakti Kendras have also created partnerships through public dialogue meetings with local governments, strengthening the relationship between elected officials and the communities they serve, and creating opportunities for the women to assert their needs. Finally, frontline workers and civil society organizations have also proven essential in making digital social protection work in practice. During the COVID-19 crisis, for example, Argentina's fully digital family emergency income relied on frontline workers to support registration, resolve complaints, and ensure timely payments. And in many countries, organizations of informal workers supported their members to navigate the often complicated digital platforms that were created for them to gain access to government support schemes. In a nutshell, making social protection work for women requires more than gender-responsive design. It demands institutional investments in adequate staffing and decent working conditions for frontline social workers, alongside training and support that empower them to uphold recipients' dignity, agency, and rights. In relationships between local governments and grassroots organizations to enable effective last-mile delivery and bottom-up accountability. And in digital tools and data systems, yes, not to replace human engagement, but to enhance it and gear it towards ensuring inclusiveness, equality, and the realization of rights. In closing, let me return to where I began, with Helen Joseph and the values that defined her life: courage, solidarity, and collective action. These values are just as essential today as they were during her time. Confronted with overlapping crises and deepening inequalities, they offer a compass to guide the way forward. They are reflected as well, I would say, in the theme that South Africa defined for its G20 presidency: solidarity, equality, and sustainability, grounded in Ubuntu philosophy, which stresses interconnectedness and collective responsibility. We have seen that social protection holds powerful potential to advance gender equality, build resilience, and lay the foundations of more just societies. But realizing this potential means confronting serious challenges, including persistent gaps in coverage and adequacy due to chronic underinvestment, policy silos and fragmented delivery systems, and growing political resistance to redistributive and gender-responsive policies. Overcoming these challenges and creating the conditions to advance social justice in a world that seems tilted against it requires strategies that would have been familiar to Helen Joseph: bottom-up organizing, principled leadership, and alliance building across difference. Even in a multilateral system under strain, there are some bright spots where we see these strategies in action. Countries like South Africa, Spain, and Brazil have chosen cooperation and solidarity over polarization and isolationism. They've taken on leadership roles by hosting global summits that seek to reinvigorate multilateralism. And these summits remain important spaces for renewing shared commitments to gender equality and social justice, even in the face, or particularly in the face, of geopolitical headwinds. Recently, we have also seen modest progress on financing, which remains a major bottleneck for low and middle-income countries striving to build comprehensive gender-responsive social protection systems. Many African countries are trapped in a vicious cycle of debt and underinvestment, with at least 30 countries in the region spending more on debt interest payments than on basic services such as health or education. Analysts agree that this issue was not comprehensively addressed at the Financing for Development conference in July, but there was progress in other areas. Member states agreed, for example, to support developing countries to increase social protection coverage by 2 percentage points per year, and urged the International Monetary Fund to safeguard social spending in fiscal consolidation packages. The prospect of a UN tax convention, which is currently being negotiated by the General Assembly on request of the Africa Group, could help create additional fiscal space while enhancing progressivity and transparency. And a new initiative launched by Brazil and Spain aims to make sure that the world's super rich also pay their fair share of tax. The upcoming World Summit on Social Development in Doha offers another opportunity to ensure that gender equality really is a guiding principle for efforts to protect social protection expenditure and to expand access to social protection, so that in a few years' time, I don't have to stand here and tell you again that the gender gaps have continued to widen, but instead we've managed to close them. Meanwhile, at the national level, many countries are making progress through gradual but deliberate policy innovation and adaptation, despite fiscal constraints. As I hope to have highlighted, countries can extend coverage and adequacy progressively. They can adapt programs to include care and violence prevention services and improve service quality as they go along. Promoting greater gender responsiveness also requires more evidence, including the kind of feminist research that I have drawn on for this lecture and that foregrounds the lived experiences of marginalized groups of women and girls. Most importantly, it requires grassroots organizing and a recognition on behalf of state actors that they can achieve more by working together with civil society and women's rights organizations. At the current conjuncture, holding the line on gender equality and pushing for progressive policy change often feels like an uphill battle, but we can draw inspiration from history. Helen Joseph's life and legacy reminds us that in the climb, we can build strength, forge solidarity, and make change possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Staab, and excellent presentation, truly reflecting the spirit of Helen Joseph. Thank you very much. Let's give another round of applause. So I now call upon Prof. Lauren Graham to make some comments and also offer a vote of thanks. Thank you very much.
Good evening. Dr. Staab, I really want to express my appreciation to you for leaving us on such a hopeful note, in particularly a global context in which it really does feel as if we are facing these headwinds. And you've reminded us that the women who have come before us, who we celebrate this month, faced significant headwinds themselves, that it has been done before. And I thank you for leaving us with that hopeful message. The Helen Joseph Lecture, of course, is named after an individual, but celebrates a whole movement of women. Her actions were actions that were of a movement of women, and they are not just South African. They hold broader significance, as you have so eloquently showed us today. It is, of course, ordinary women, often those most excluded from opportunity, who drive change, who sustain social life, and who envision a better life for all, not just for the privileged few. Thank you for pointing to their agency and the significant role that social protection plays in not only sustaining the lives of such women and indeed all people, but also the very important role that this mechanism plays in promoting gender equality and how we might be able to achieve that over time. Although it wasn't headlined in your lecture, what I really appreciated was you bringing these voices of women and women's movements from around the world into the lecture throughout. We also appreciate your engagement with the idea of social protection as foundational to equity and stability in the context of failures of states and indeed currently of multilateralism. We often celebrate resilience amongst women and other excluded groups, as we should. Their agency is important to note, but it should not be taken for granted or unsupported. Embedding your lecture in the experiences of women, understanding the multidimensionality that individuals managing multiple challenges face, has brought the human element in. I really appreciated your focus on the human face of social protection. And I could feel it in the room when that came up, of how many people really did appreciate that. And I know we have a number of those social service professionals and paraprofessionals in the room with us today who should be celebrated and, as you say, are often not. They're often forgotten. I think what you have presented to us today is the importance of a caring society, the human face of the system. A caring society, which is a message that is so desperately needed today. We greatly appreciate the time and consideration you have taken to linking your insights to global issues of the day and the many forums that are happening this year to forge ahead with these issues, but also to the historical women's movement, both locally and globally. So thank you for the time and effort you've put in and for your message of hope today. I must also express gratitude to the Vice-Chancellor for his opening remarks and for officially hosting the event over the office hosting the event over the last 20 years, and today in particular Prof. Mpedi, your opening remarks. As we said, as you noted, this is a lecture that has a history of 20 years in line with UJ's 20 years celebration this year. And to Professor Camilla Naidu and the faculty for their support in hosting this lecture over these last 20 years as well. I want to express appreciation to Leila, who has really stewarded this lecture over the last 20 years. And I know we didn't host it over the last couple of years, but it's in some ways come home to the CSDA as we also celebrate 21 years. And I know it's been ably stewarded by Natasha and Victoria and others in the faculty over this time. And then lastly, my grateful thanks to the CSDA team, Jade, and the rest of the team, as well as Helen and the rest of the team and the faculty, who have done all of the background work to make this happen today. And we often forget to thank those people who are not always in the room. So grateful thanks to each and every one of them for the role they've played. That brings us to the conclusion of this lecture, and I'd like to then invite you to join us for refreshments just outside to the left, and to take time to engage with Dr. Staab on her wonderful lecture this evening. Many thanks.